Good morning. Delighted to be joined here by our new Minister of Energy, Sonia Savage, who I think might be the most qualified new energy minister in Alberta history. So I'm delighted to have her expertise with us as we begin to get Alberta's economy back to work. And that begins with standing up for our energy industry that has been such a key engine of Canada's prosperity in recent decades. And that is why I'm here today, to show that this new government will stand up for and defend Alberta workers as we need to now and in the future. As you know, yesterday Minister Savage and I met with the rest of our cabinet at our first meeting. And as we promised we would during the election, we proclaimed into law the Preserving Canada's Economic Prosperity Act, also known as Bill 12, which gives our government the ability to curtail oil shipments from Alberta. We did this to have the power to protect Alberta, to protect our ability to get full value for our resources should circumstances require. The campaign to landlock Alberta's resources, resulting in the failure of several pipeline projects to Canada's west and east coasts, has been economically devastating and has contributed to the jobs crisis in this province. As we can see with the recently released national economic statistics, the continued decline and stagnation of Alberta's energy sector is also affecting our national economy in a very serious way. The law that we proclaimed yesterday in our cabinet gives Alberta the ability to, if and only for as long as needed, to control the export of our natural resources in order to maximize their value, whether through BC or elsewhere. Like all Canadians, but more than most, British Columbians benefit from the Trans Mountain Pipeline. It's the way that most BC gasoline is delivered. It has safely transported petroleum to BC's Lower Mainland since 1953. I repeat, the Trans Mountain Pipeline has been there for over 6 decades without any significant environmental hazard or incident, fueling the economy of the Lower Mainland for decade after decade. And now it's time to expand that pipeline for the benefit of all Canadians, but mostly for the benefit of British Columbians. British Columbians are currently facing a gasoline crisis, paying a ridiculous $1.70 for a litre in Metro Vancouver. Unfortunately, since coming to office in July of 2017, the BC government has opposed the expansion of this pipeline every step of the way, most recently at the British Columbia Court of Appeal. And in so doing, they've driven up gasoline prices in the Lower Mainland. And just as the Trans Mountain Pipeline has benefited all Canadians, but British Columbians more than most, opposing the Trans Mountain Pipeline hurts all Canadians, but British Columbians more than most. The BC government is doing everything it can to block the expansion of the very pipeline that would get Alberta oil and gas to the gasoline-constrained Lower Mainland and beyond. This hurts ordinary families in British Columbia. This hurts Alberta, and it's my job as Premier to defend Alberta. That's exactly what we will do. It also hurts all of Canada. One province claiming to have the power to block exports from the rest of Canada would undermine one of the principles of our Confederation, the economic union between our provinces. Now, the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion was approved by the National Energy Board after years of exhaustive delays applying the world's strongest environmental regulations. It was also approved by the federal Liberal cabinet. That approval came with 157 legally binding conditions designed to ensure, as I say, the highest environmental standards on earth. The federal government is taking more time to ensure proper consultation of Indigenous people, further to the federal court decision. This is a necessary step to fully discharge, and I've spoken to the Prime Minister about that. But these decisions of the National Energy Board, of the federal cabinet, demonstrate that this project, Trans Mountain's expansion, is safe. It is environmentally responsible, and it is economically necessary. It's a project that has been developed to the highest standard, and by any rational set of rules, It would be built already and certainly not be harassed by a campaign of obstruction by provincial governments or foreign-funded special interests. Now, I always say Albertans are fair people. We play by the rules, but we expect others to play by the same rules too. And we'll do what is necessary to protect the value of our resources and a confederation that actually works, an economic union that is a real country that allows exports to happen without obstruction. We want to do this for British Columbians and for all Canadians. Albertans are rightly feeling deep frustration, a sense that we've contributed massively to the rest of Canada, but are being blocked and pinned down at every turn. Albertans have contributed more than $600 billion to the rest of Canada since 1961 through fiscal transfers, creating hundreds of thousands of good-paying jobs, family-supporting jobs, including for British Columbians, and all of those who have come to take part in Alberta's prosperity. We're proud to have helped our fellow Canadians when times were tough, but now it's Albertans who are going through a time of trial. We hope to work together as Canadians to move out of this period of adversity. But if need be, we will do what is necessary to preserve the value of our resources and to stand up for our workers. By proclaiming this law, we're showing that we're serious about protecting Canada's vital economic interests. This does not mean energy shipments will immediately be reduced, but rather that our government will now have the ability actually to use the law should circumstances require. It's worth noting that more than 100 First Nations support the expansion of Trans Mountain, as do the majority of British Columbians in recent polling. It's worth noting, for that matter, that so do the majority of Canadians. But what Premier Horgan must know is that Albertans are absolutely united behind building this pipeline. And as Premier, I will stand with Albertans, and we will stand up for Alberta. Our government wants to cooperate with British Columbia. And to that end, I spoke with Premier Horgan last night and indicated I hope we'll have a chance to meet in the near future to discuss these issues at length. And we'll be discussing these matters with other provinces as well. I'll be meeting with Premier Ford, for example, this Friday in Toronto. But we will never be afraid to stand up for Alberta when we must. Thank you, and happy to take your questions.
BC has said it's going to go to court and challenge this constitutionality of this bill. What do you say to that?
Well, if that's the case, we'll respond in court.
And then why not just stop shipments now? Like, what are you waiting for?
I've always said, Graham, that my intention as a new Premier is to seek common ground and to try to explain the position of Alberta to Premier Horgan, and for that matter, to Premier Legault on these energy issues, and to Prime Minister Trudeau, which I hope to do at greater length in the near future. So I've always said we want to start by trying to build relationships, find common ground, and not start immediately with our highest card to play. I've always said that using this legislation would be the final and not the first step in responding to a campaign of obstruction. But what we're demonstrating by proclaiming into law Bill 12 is that we are prepared, if necessary, if there is no other way to defend our interests, we're prepared to use this very powerful tool.
Sorry, but then what is BC doing right now to obstruct? They've gone to court asking for a constitutional definition on their rights to regulate the flow through pipelines. What is it they're doing that's illegal or unconstitutional?
Well, the British Columbia government has withheld permits and has indicated, as Premier Horgan said in the last campaign, that they will use every tool in the toolbox to stop this project. And that's what they've been doing in a practical way. And I'll be sending a letter to Premier Horgan in the very near future outlining the measures taken and the statements made by their government, which we believe constitute a campaign of obstruction.
Good morning, Premier. I was wondering, what was your conversation like with John Horgan last night? Can you expand on that?
It was a respectful conversation. I stated our position and he stated his, and I underscored for the Premier it is not our intention to use the powers in this legislation at this point, but that our proclamation of Bill 12 underscores that we are serious about it, that this is not some bluff, that if there is obstruction, that we will protect the value of Alberta's resources. He responded with their position, and then we agreed to have a longer meeting. Look, I acknowledge Premier Horgan is dealing with a very serious problem with the escalation of retail gas prices, particularly in the Lower Mainland. People in the Vancouver region are rightfully ticked off. They're paying $1.70 a litre to fill up their cars and their trucks, and they want to know why. And I believe one of the reasons why is that we don't have enough pipeline capacity to ship both refined gas and unrefined bitumen to the Lower Mainland. The whole point of TMX, it will move how many barrels per day?
It's expanded to about 800,000.
800,000 barrels per day will mean that we can increase shipments of refined products to the Lower Mainland. That will reduce gas prices for Vancouverites. So I don't think Premier Horgan should be responding to me. He should be responding to British Columbians whose gas prices are going to be artificially higher because the BC government doesn't want to import more gasoline from Alberta.
You mentioned another meeting or a longer meeting. Do you know when that'll happen and where?
We have the the Western Premier's meeting coming up in late June, and I said I'd be very happy to get to Vancouver, Victoria, to meet with him before that. I'd like to have a longer direct conversation with him, and frankly, it's my intention to do that with as many premiers as I can before the end of June.
Well, Cabinet voted yesterday. Did you get any type of legal opinion that Bill 12 would actually survive a constitutional challenge?
I have not yet received and read a legal opinion. I have been briefed by officials, and those are the same officials that advised the last government that wrote this legislation. So we're taking the same legal advice that the NDP received.
So Darren Billis, when we spoke with the media yesterday, said that Ms. Notley, I guess on the way out the door, told you that you shouldn't do this. She didn't have any kind of opinion or any better advice for you?
Well, I'm first of all, that I would ask Minister Billis, then why did he vote for the legislation? And why did they tell Albertans that they were going to do it?
The suggestion is if it gets challenged in court, we're not going to be able to use it. Would we be able to use this if it's tied up in the courts? Does this not take that tool off the table pending legal review?
Look, I can't predict what's going to happen in the courts. All I can say is that the legislature unanimously voted for this bill. The NDP then indicated they weren't going to use it. And I don't think that there's any point in having legislation like this if you then say it's a dead letter. We have said that we believe this is an important tool to protect the value of Alberta's resources. I would ask the NDP, if they don't think that's the case, then why did they propose the bill? Why did they make it their key legislation last year? Why did they campaign on it for so long if they don't think it's a real way of protecting the value of our resources?
What does BC really have to do to use the law in English and in French, please?
I would ask Premier Horgan to respect the majority of British Columbians who want to see Trans Mountain built. I would ask him to respect the over 100 First Nations that support this project. I would ask him to help reduce gas prices in Vancouver and region by allowing us to get more gas into British Columbia. Support this project. At the very least, get out of the way and stop trying to obstruct it by withholding permits and challenging it every step of the way in the courts.
In French, please.
Oh, excusez-moi. Je dis au Premier ministre de la Colombie-Britannique, s'il vous plaît, appuyez ce projet qui est appuyé par la majorité de la population en Colombie-Britannique, qui est appuyé par la majorité, par plus de centaines des communautés autochtones, pour permettre une réduction des prix pour le pétrole au Colombie-Britannique.
Oh, let's go to the phones. Operator, can you please put through the first caller?
Bell is the Calgary Sun. Your line is open. Premier, how do you convince Albertans that this isn't just tough talk and no walk? I mean, under what circumstances? Where is the line where you say now is the time to turn off the tap? How bad does it have to get before you actually employ Bill 12?
Well, Rick, we're just in the first full day of our government. I've been clear, as I was with you in an interview, I think last week, that we will seek the path of diplomacy, seeking common ground, assertively defending our position as Albertans, our vital economic interests, and making it clear to our partners in the Federation, including the BC government, that we are prepared to use tools like this if there is ongoing obstruction. So, Rick, when you're in a game of poker, you don't show the other folks around the table what your high card is. You don't play that high card on the first hand. And so we're going to play the long game here. And as I've said very clearly for the last year, Rick, we will, if the BC government pursues a policy of obstruction that hurts British Columbians with higher gas prices, we will look at other ways of responding before we get to this, the strongest tool in our toolbox, which is Bill 12. So we do not intend to use this right now. We are simply communicating our willingness to do so should we face a long-term campaign of obstruction. I do hope, Rick, in the short term, what we're all focused on is what we hope will be the approval of the federal cabinet for Trans Mountain following the additional consultations being conducted by the federal government, and I'll be addressing that in Ottawa tomorrow.
Do you have a follow-up, Rick?
Yeah, just a supplementary is, so what did the former premier actually advise you to do on this bill, and why did she advise what she advised?
You know, I'm not going to get into private conversations with the former premier. I think we had a conversation where we both exchanged frank views on a number of questions, and we're not. I don't think it's appropriate for us to start turning that into a public meeting. All I can tell you is that the NDP brought forward this bill. They passed it as their keynote legislation last year. It had unanimous support in the Alberta legislature, and we campaigned on proclaiming this into law to demonstrate to the rest of Canada that we are prepared to stand up for this province and defend the value of our resources.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Our next question comes from Jeffrey Morgan of the Financial Post. Your line is open.
Good morning. Pardon me, good morning. Wanted to get your thoughts on the federal government today announced that they would include in situ oil sands projects in the project list for Bill C-69, in so long as there is or if there was no cap on emissions from the oil sands. Do you intend to take this up with the Ottawa, and how will you respond to this?
Yes, I'll be responding to that with Minister Savage at the Senate Energy Committee tomorrow in Ottawa, and we may have other meetings in Ottawa where we will address this issue. If the federal government does that, we will challenge the constitutionality of Bill C-69, well, if it's passed in anything like its current form, because implicit in Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines law, is an intrusion into exclusive provincial constitutional authority to regulate the development of our natural resources, including upstream oil and gas, such as in situ oil sands developments. Peter Lougheed fought for and won an historic constitutional victory in 1982 with the inclusion of Section 92A of the Constitution Act, which clearly gives provinces exclusive jurisdiction to regulate the production of natural resources, including oil and gas. So if the federal government has zero constitutional authority to Bigfoot in here and pretend that they can regulate in situ oil sands developments. I think that is a clear and obvious violation of the Constitution, and that's why we would challenge that position in court. Now, having said that, I've been clear that our platform did not speak to the issue of the emissions cap. We do not have the intention of changing the current legislation at this point. Frankly, I've never understood why Canada would be the only major oil and gas producer in the world to put a cap on its prosperity and its production. I might be more open to a cap on the emissions if I saw Saudi Arabia, Venezuela, Iran, Qatar, Russia, and the United States capping themselves. But having said that, we have a lot of other irons in the fire. We are focused on Bill C-69 itself, Bill C-48, as you saw, I testified on this yesterday and announced that if it passes, we will challenge it as well as it being unconstitutional because of its prejudicial effect on Alberta. We are focused on the construction of Trans Mountain, and a number of other vital issues. Right now, the whole question of the emissions cap is academic because we're nowhere close to hitting it. So for us, that is not a fight that we're going to get into at this point because it's right now a completely theoretical and academic issue, and we'll be challenging 669 in court in any event.
Do you have a follow-up, Jeff?
No, thank you.
Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Our next question comes from Tony of CBC Calgary. Your line is open.
Yeah, hi, Premier. Just back on the Bill 12 or the Prosperity Act. Presumably that if we're turning off the taps, that's going to have an impact on oil companies and refiners. So I'm just wondering, is the government looking at compensation for any losses incurred by those companies?
Again, that's theoretical because, as I've been clear, we don't intend to actually bring in the licensing regime to reduce shipments to any part of Canada at this point. And should we, and I've been clear, Tony, that our intention would be to use other points of economic leverage to stand up for Alberta. We see this as the final and not the first step in doing so. And my hope is to have my hope is that the British Columbia government will frankly listen to reason and listen to British Columbians and help us get gas prices down in the Lower Mainland. So my hope is that we don't have to use this power. Should, however, we feel that there is no alternative but to use Bill 12 to protect the value of our resources, then we'll consider that the issue that you've raised when we come to it.
Do you have a follow-up, Tony?
No, that's good. Thank you, Premier.
Okay.
All right, guys, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
The budget, on the provincial
Your
budget.
energy minister?
We see a budget soon?
Not soon. We need to, first of all, our first step there will be to appoint a blue ribbon panel on the province's finances. You can expect an announcement as early as next week on that. And they'll have a mandate to report back this summer, coming summer, on the real state of the province's finances. That will then help to inform our budget planning. So I would expect a budget for 2019-2020 in the fall of this year. In the meantime, we'll be operating on what are called special warrants. Oh, you already had one, Kim. I'm sorry.
I'm curious on why to hear from your energy minister.
Yeah, why don't you just come on in?
Sure, I guess I'm just thrilled to be a part of Premier Kenney's team. We have a lot of work ahead. I've only been sworn in for less than 24 hours, and already I'm on my way to Ottawa. Accompanied the Premier to the Bill C-48 Senate hearings yesterday. So I guess I can say I've been thrown into the fire pretty quickly. I've spent over a decade working on these issues, so the issues are very familiar. But I'm really looking forward to these challenges and really looking forward to helping the Premier get our resources to market.
Why are you walking back your language on the emissions cap? I ask that because officials told us, your party told us in the tech briefing on the UCP platform, unbidden, I might add, we are getting rid of the emissions cap. We all did stories about it. No one corrected it. No one's corrected it since. So why are you changing your language now?
Well,
Why is the UCP
I'm not changing. Well, I'm not changing my language.
Not you personally, but the UCP is because your officials told us that you were going to. No one corrected the stories. So what gives?
Well, all I can tell you, Emma, is that I've been at this for 3 years, nearly 3 years, and I've never said that. I've always opposed the emissions cap because I can't understand why we would impose one when no other oil producer is. But I've never seen it as a priority. We have a lot of other irons in the fire, a lot of other fights to fight. This one is way down the line. We're talking about a decade from now when it might actually damage the industry, and so Emma, we are opposed to it.
But why did your officials say you were going to? Why would they go out of their way to point that out?
Emma, all I can tell you is I signed off on a platform that pointedly does not address the emissions cap.
Did you ever discuss the emissions cap with your officials?
In the platform discussion, yes, we did, and we decided not to put it in the platform.
Did Cabinet kill any regulations yesterday? You promised that you'd have a press conference today with the first regulations that you were killing.
Well, this is the first decision we passed was the proclamation of Bill 12, and there are more. There were some regulatory changes made that will be announced either later today or throughout the week. I don't have the list, but canola was not one of them. I did, in the transition period, was approached by the Public Service and asked, we approved an extension of the deadline to apply for financing for canola farmers. And yesterday I did receive a phone call from Prime Minister Trudeau, who helpfully informed me that the federal government is also extending additional financial support to canola farmers, and I thank the Prime Minister on behalf of Alberta farmers. I'll be meeting with Minister Dreeshen as soon as I get back to Ottawa, from Ottawa, to discuss this further. Thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Cheers.